will be inspired to have increased and renewed relationship with the God who will change your entire life if you will let him. And if you feel like you're in a dark and a hopeless place, I pray that my story may give you hope and you will know that there's total freedom in Jesus' name. So when I was born, one of the doctors came in and told my parents that I had been born with a condition known as proximal femoral focal deficiency, or PFFD for short. PFFD is a rare non-genetic condition where the upper part of the femur bone is either malformed or missing, causing one leg to be shorter than the other. This difference causes functional problems within a child's ability to walk and can stress other bones and joints in the body's own effort to compensate. The doctor also informed my parents that I've been born with many other hip and knee problems. So while my parents were still at the hospital, the doctor told us we have a few options. A couple of those options were A, amputate before I turned 10 months old, or do nothing, and by the time I was done growing, I would have a 12-inch leg difference and many other hip and knee issues. So as first-time parents, my parents left that hospital, in their words, feeling devastated, confused, and wondering how God could allow something like this to happen to their son. My mom fell on her knees and cried out to God day by day, and she was eventually led to finding an online support group of families who had undergone a procedure known as limb lengthening. So she furthermore reached out to some of the families on that website, and they recommended a highly specialized team of doctors out in Baltimore, Maryland. So when I turned 10 months old, we traveled out to Baltimore, Maryland to visit the doctors out there. The doctors told us about leg lengthening. However, they also told us that it was going to be a very long and difficult journey. So my parents had a lot of peace about this after the doctors told them this. And when I was 2.5, I went in for my first 6-hour surgery with these doctors. I had 5 surgeries and several setbacks before I had my first femoral leg lengthening. So for those of you who don't know, limb lengthening starts with a procedure, a surgical procedure. And the surgical procedure starts with a bone osteotomy. So in my case, the doctors went in, they broke my femur bone, and they inserted 2 sets of 3 pins on both sides of the broken bone. I don't know if you can see it up there. Next one. Yeah, so there's pins going all the way through my bone there, and it was like right on the opposite sides of the break. And then there was a 3rd set in my tibia right there to help with stabilization during the process. So the process of limb lengthening is split up into 2 different phases. The first phase, the first 3 months, is the lengthening phase. And this is where we are manually, you can go to the next one, manually cranking the device and gaining 1 millimeter of length per day, every single day for 3 months straight. Then the next phase is the next 3 months, and that's the bone consolidation period. And this is essentially where we're just waiting on all the bone and muscles and tissues that have been stretched so hard to finally grow back. So during my first leg lengthening, I ended up gaining 3 inches of bone growth, which was a huge answer to prayer for us. God answered a lot of other prayers along the journey as well. Even though the doctor said I might be challenged, my leg didn't limit me from trying anything. I played baseball, basketball, snowboarding, flag football, soccer on the bench. But God showed up in crazy ways as well during my surgeries. My second limb lengthening, we ended up getting 3.4 inches of bone growth. And my doctor, who had been specializing in limb lengthening for over 20 years, we had officially broken his record. No other patient of my doctor's had ever gotten that much length with no major setbacks. And we didn't have any major setbacks. We'd broken his record. And it was just crazy because we only prayed for 3 inches of bone growth, but God had a much bigger and better plan. So kind of going into my own personal story, like about where I was with God during all this time. So I first accepted Jesus into my life at the young age of 5 years old and grew up in a Christian family and remember growing up loving Jesus myself. Then I remember at some point in my life, during around 7th grade, the enemy really started confusing my image of God. And I had many feelings of condemnation. I always felt like for mistakes that I made in the past that I couldn't be forgiven for it. And for mistakes that I was making, I felt like God couldn't forgive me for them. So During this time, I wanted to go to a different school, so my parents decided to put me in a public school. And it was around this time that I started getting bullied and made fun of for my leg and the way that I walked. And I remember nights crying out to God and just asking Him to stop the bullying and everything, and it just seemed like it didn't stop. Um, so after a year and a half at that school, we came back to Front Range, more or less because I was struggling academically, but that's beside the point. I was also brought to different church services, and I remember being prayed over for supernatural healings in my leg. And I remember during these times, I truly believed in these moments that God was going to heal me. And it just turns out that this was not a part of God's plan at the time. So I started getting mad and blaming God. It seemed like other people around me had easier lives, and I was just going through so much. And so I just essentially was like, you know what, God, I'm going to put you in a box. Maybe 30, 40 years from now, we'll see what's in that box. But for now, I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. So I got into a lifestyle full of poor choices, always putting other people down, and always worrying about pleasing other people. I was letting anger, fear, pride, emptiness, depression, and self-centeredness control my life. I didn't care about God or His plans anymore. I told my mom I was done with God one night, and I know it absolutely crushed her heart. It's crazy to think, but only last year, I had my heart set on going to college for 2 reasons: to acquire loads of wealth and to party. But my parents knew that God had a special calling on my life. I just had a really hard time believing them. It was during this time that God put YWAM and not college on their heart strongly for me. YWAM stands for Youth with a Mission, and it's a mission organization with many bases around the world, including a couple here in Colorado. And YWAM has 2 priorities: to know God and to make God known. So my parents first brought up YWAM several months before graduation, and at first I immediately shut them down. I felt like they just wanted to fix me, and that was not at all what I had planned for my life. They would gently bring it up to me and have me watch videos of the beach close to the base in Kona and have me talk to people who had done it, kind of luring me in. I started thinking about it because I thought I could go and then come back, do community college for 6 months, and then get back to my plans of acquiring loads of wealth. So throughout those next several months, my parents prayed that God would soften my heart towards YWAM because they knew they couldn't force me to go. And the crazy part is God miraculously softened my heart to doing a discipleship training school through YWAM. So discipleship training school, or DTS, is a course through YWAM, a 6-month course through YWAM. And there's split up into 2 phases. So the first phase is the first 3 months, called lecture phase. And during this time, you're really diving deep into, you're pretty much gaining the equivalent of 7, I think someone told me, 7 years of church knowledge in 3 months. And you're pretty much during that time, what you're doing is you're just praising and worshiping God daily, serving inside and outside of the community, preaching the gospel to the outside community, and just really learning, like growing in your faith with God. So a lot of people ask me, why did I decide to go to YWAM? Well, if I look back on my old life, I realized that nothing that I was doing was making me happy. Nothing. It was all empty, and I was at the point in my life where I also was ready to give God a second chance. So my first night at YWAM, I rededicated my life during a worship set. And within the first week of lecture, there were things that I was still struggling with, such as unforgiveness, anger, and a lot of the things I previously mentioned. But as lecture phase continued, and ever since I rededicated my life to Jesus, I learned many more characteristics about who God is. My heart was completely open to it as well, as I genuinely wanted to learn more about God and see Him move in my life. And I wanted answers. I wanted to know why God didn't heal my leg supernaturally, why I had to go through bullying, why I was born with my condition, if He was even real. Through my experience at YWAM, I can say God not only spoke, but He answered a lot of my questions. And I will share some of the ways through my experience at YWAM how God answered my questions and drew me into deep relationship with Him. So I'll share a quick story. Within my first couple weeks of being at YWAM, I remember praying to God, and I was asking Him just to have, I was asking Him for a confirmation moment. I just wanted to have a surreal moment with God where I could just know He was real and just go after Him. And I remember it didn't take very long of me praying this prayer, because it was within the next few days. I'd been praying it daily. And this random guy who I hadn't talked to on the base approached me, and he said, hey, Holy Spirit just told me to tell you that you're a walking miracle. And I was like, all right, cool. Who are you? And then he was like, yeah, man. He was like, you know what? I would love to hear your testimony sometime. So we set a date on that. We planned on it. Woke up super early one morning, and we went over to this little area where we could talk. And I shared with him my story, and then he shared with me his story. And I think the crazy part about this story was he asked if he could pray over me. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he started praying over me. It was just this beautiful prayer. And I was just there receiving the prayer. I've never had anything like this to this day. I've like waited for it and I just haven't had it. But it's like he was praying over me and my mouth and my right hand just started like burning and like almost tingling in a sense. It was burning. And he was still praying. And there was no way that he knew because I didn't tell him or anything because he was still praying. I didn't want to interrupt his prayer. But he kept praying, and as he was wrapping up his prayer, he was like, and the reason that your mouth is burning is because you're going to testify to God's goodness. Ooh, shout for that. So, so this experience for me was definitely a huge answer to prayer. I wanted to experience God in a way that was very real to me, and for me, that experience definitely was. It was crazy though, because as I continued to pursue a relationship with Jesus, everything in my life just started falling into place. I wasn't focused on sinning less. I wasn't focused on trying to be perfect. I was just focused on Jesus, and my life started changing, and God came after me. One thing I realized though is that saying yes to Jesus isn't a one-time raise your hand decision. It's an everyday decision that we have to make, where we decide that we want God's ways over our own. As I kept growing in my relationship with God, he began showing me that he loves us more than any earthly father ever could, and how he is more than ready to take us back and forgive us of every single sin that we have committed. It is a love story of intimacy about a king who loved his people so much that he left everything to come and die for us. The cross, the measure of the pain that Jesus went through, is a symbol of how much you are worth because of the price that was paid. You can tell how much something is worth by the price that was paid. God showed me who I really am, that I'm worthy, I'm loved, and he has chosen me and he has plans for my life. This is who we all are. We are defined by a creator. So why are we letting other people who don't really know who they are try and tell us who we are? God freed me from my anger towards him, being mean to other people, and worrying about pleasing other people. I get to live out the freedom of life every day and choose to follow Jesus every single day, knowing that I'm forgiven, that Jesus has removed my sin from me, and that I can wake up in the joy that the creator of the universe is with me everywhere I go. My life with Christ now is not a perfect, pain-free life, but I know that God's ways are so much better than mine. I started noticing this rapid growth in my relationship with God the more I just kept seeking him. So, as I was explaining earlier, the first phase of YWAM is lecture phase. So the next phase is the outreach phase. So it's the next 3 months. And this is where, so during lecture phase, there's already like for our class, there was 4 pre-selected destinations. And I felt like God was leading me to go to India. So yeah, my team of 8 and I, yeah, there's us. My team of 8 and I went to India lived there for 2.5 months. And it was just awesome because during our time in India, God gave us so many awesome opportunities and used our team in so many crazy ways. We went out there, built relationships, loved and served the people, and shared with them the ways that God had changed our lives. And it was awesome for me because it was like God had genuinely gave me a love for these people. And because of that, I wanted to share with them about the very God who changed my life. It was the best thing that had happened in my life and the freedom that I now had. It was like God did something amazing in my life. Now, why not tell someone about that? And doing so was tough at times and felt weird, but was the most rewarding thing because I knew that was our purpose for why we were out there. For me on outreach, it wasn't like there was one huge moment that was so defining for me. It was more of a series of moments where God gave me opportunities, many times hard decisions. It was saying yes to God in those moments, no matter how I was feeling. I'll share another story really quick. So in India, we would have these like weeknight Bible studies that we would do probably like 3 times a week. And it was during the night. So we would typically have like 2 people from our team go out on these Bible studies. So I remember this one night in particular, me and this other girl on our team volunteered to go for the Bible study. And it was like an hour and a half drive, but when we finally got there, we all crammed into this little room, probably like 20 of us, this tiny little living space. And we all went around, we were all sitting in a circle, and we all went around and introduced ourselves. And I remember that there was this one woman in particular who had no voice. So we went around and introduced ourselves, and she was like, she couldn't say anything. She had absolutely no voice. So someone from across the room was like, "This is my mother. Her name is Susan, and she's been sick for the past 3 weeks. She has absolutely no voice." So that just kind of stood out to me for some reason. I don't really know why. But anyways, I shared my testimony, and the girl next to me gave her sermon, and then I just felt this nudge that I should go pray for her after that. And at first, I immediately just kind of shut down. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And then I like felt it again the moment I shut it down. And so I turned to the girl next to me on my team. I was like, "Hey, can you find out if God wants me to pray over this woman here?" And she said she like turned around for like 4 minutes, and then she looked back. She was like, "No, I'm not really getting anything." And I was like, "Okay, that's good." And then it was like soon enough after that, I just felt the nudging again. I was like, "Oh, great, I got to do this." So I decided to step out of my comfort zone finally after the 3rd time. And I went over there and I asked if I could pray over her. And at that point, she couldn't really say no. So I just kind of went for it. But anyways, I started praying this prayer, and it was like God spoke like a prayer of healing through me over this woman. And right after the prayer was over, I remember she said someone's name from across the room. It was very raspy, but you could still hear some voice behind it. And then it was like within 1 or 2 minutes, she was talking exactly how I'm talking to you right now. And for me, someone who hasn't had their own supernatural healing, that was hard for me to believe, like hard for me to wrap my mind around. I was like, okay, she had to have been faking it. But no, guys, God does miracles, seriously. And it was so cool. So I think one of the craziest parts about that story that was such a defining moment for me was on the car ride back, that hour and a half. We were all just in awe of what God had done, and we were just listening to worship music in the car. And I'll never forget, but I remember that God just like spoke to me. I just felt his presence so strongly. He spoke to me and he said, "The reason that I healed her through you is because you put your faith in me, even though you hadn't even had your healing yet." One of the things God spoke to me through my circumstances about my leg is that he's doing a supernatural healing in my heart and in my spirit. And let me tell you, I realize this is not something I would ever trade for a quick supernatural physical fix. Because after that, who knows where my heart would be? For me, it is something that I've now learned to thank God for, because I've seen the ways that he has used my leg and what I've gone through to relate to others and to give them the same hope that God has given me. When people ask what has happened to my leg, it's now an awesome opportunity to share with them my story and what God has done, instead of dreading it as I did in the past when people would ask. So I encourage you today to trust God no matter what your situation looks like right now. I've had 16 surgeries up until now, with the most recent hip surgery being only 3 weeks ago. And even though I've had to go through all this, God has been so good in all of it. I can see his hand as I look back on all my life this far through. The best and the worst, God was there. And even though there were times during this surgery that I definitely wanted to quit sometimes, and times where I felt like I wanted to throw in the towel, I knew that God had a plan for me, and so that's where I built my faith on the solid rock. And for one of the first times in my life, my legs are equal in length. But the difference now is that I know that God is going to heal me completely one day in his way, which is going to be so much better than the way I may want to have it at times. But the truth is, God knows best. I challenge you to think of a situation in your life where God has said no. Is he still good when you don't get that healing, or the pain isn't stopping, or when you're grieving the loss of a loved one? I believe in those situations that he is at work for something much greater that we may not perceive at the time. One of the things that I wanted to wrap up with is, I hope that today you got some of the things you guys have taken away, is that you know that there's a God who sees you with all your imperfections, and he loves you so much. He still died for you. And that I just really hope that you guys know that there is hope that God will change your life if you truly are willing to let him. And that, yeah, you guys just know that there's so much freedom from whatever type of bondage you feel like you're in Jesus' name. Wrapping it up, just a few thank yous that I had. A few people I would like to thank for this opportunity. I want to thank God for changing my life and giving me the story that I shared with you today. He is the reason that I am standing up here on this stage today. I would like to thank my parents for all the blood, sweat, and tears they have put into helping me throughout my challenges, their continual trust in God, always showing me love, and for never giving up on me, even when it seemed like there wasn't any hope. I would like to thank Mr. Spector for always being there for me, always seeing the best in me and never giving up on me. You knew that God had been in my life since the first time you had me in your class in 7th grade. You never judged or condemned me, and you continually pursued me. And Mr. Harris, for letting me open up to you in one of the darkest times of my life. You were one of the first leaders I ever opened up to during that time, and you gave me so much hope. And to all the other staff at Front Range who, when I first came back to Front Range after YWAM, you ran up to me and greeted me with a hug. And I'm just so thankful for all of you. So I love you guys so much, and thanks for this opportunity.